What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Me and Christian are back. We're doing another kind of this or that, or who would you rather in your rookie drafts. And today we're talking about second round quarterbacks in your fantasy drafts, first round quarterbacks in your NFL hearts out there. Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. This is an interesting battle because it's really just a tale of who you value more with the production now or production later. And what the heck are you doing with both of these guys in terms of where they got drafted? So Bo Nix, obviously we know him, round 1, pick 12 to the Broncos. Michael Penix Jr., we have round 1, pick 8, which is the biggest shocker out there. And it kind of flips some drafts out there and kind of some rookie takes a little bit. Like, hey, what do we expect from these guys? Both these guys are kind of getting valued at like late first, early second. We like them at that value. Then they kind of get that first round capital. And when you're looking at ADP right now, kind of going in that same range, 201, Bo Nix, QB5. I've seen Bo go at 112 too and 110, like depending on if like a team really needs a quarterback. Michael Penix Jr. is kind of across the board, but 204 QB6, you're really depending on like what quarterback are you taking. If you're in the second round, okay, who are you taking and why? That's kind of what we're looking at here. Late first, obviously, Bo Nix is going to start right away. So I kind of get that. But if you're in the second round, like you're really picking who do you think is going to have the most value here between both of them? So we're going to dive into these guys. We're going to talk a scouting report, depth chart, what we expect from them, either, now and in long term from Dynasty. But I'll let Christian kind of give us just a heads up. What's Michael Penix Jr.? What does he think of him and his value?
Yeah, so Penix Jr. to me was it was the biggest shock of the draft, if only because the season was really good, the film was pretty good, but there were the injury concerns, and then you're talking about a guy who's aging. Both of these guys are fairly old for first round quarterback prospects, but Penix Jr. had a year that kind of justified being taken there. It was not far off from like a Joe Burrow type of year. As you can see on the screen, 65% completion, almost 5,000 yards in a college offense is pretty unheard of. 36 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Some really good film, some questions that you still had, though. I think he answered some of those questions in the college football playoff where he was throwing with anticipation over the middle. That was one of those things where when you watch the film, he's really, really accurate on the boundaries. And I think it really helped him having multiple top 50 picks on his team and 3 guys that went before round 3 ended in Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. But the accuracy was always there. He was consistently placing the ball to all 3 levels of the field, really. I think it's interesting because his short game isn't as refined as a lot of these other guys in this class because he was just consistently bombing the ball downfield. And it was fun to watch. It was really fun in that college offense, which had a lot of NFL concepts, but like certainly avoided the middle of the field. So the main thing with Michael Penix Jr., though, we know Kirk Cousins signed the extension. Michael Penix Jr. is the backup, unless Kirk Cousins has a setback with his Achilles, which doesn't look like it's going to happen based on all of the reports, and he's practicing out there. And it could be that, they understand what this is, and maybe Penix comes out there and he's as good as Kirk Cousins. They know they have a chance to win with Penix. I don't foresee either one of those situations happening. So you're assuming that Penix Jr. sits for at least 2 years because Kirk Cousins' deal is essentially a 2-year deal. They can get out of it after those 2 years and feel kind of comfortable with the dead money that they're going to eat. So to me, when we talk about the 2024 outlook for Penix Jr., it's very injury dependent, or it's very poor play dependent. And I just don't see that happening. Barring an unforeseen thing, like there's a chance that Kirk Cousins does go out there, get hurt, and Penix Jr. lights the world on fire because he is pretty pro ready. But to me, this is a draft and stash type of pick that you're making in the early second, which is kind of tough for me to do sometimes.
Very tough for you to do. And we're going to hear this draft and stash argument. We've already heard it, as it happened with like Jordan Love. Jordan Love was much younger than Michael Penix Jr. as well. So I think that is one thing to kind of for the narrative of like, hey, yeah, you can stash him. But, if he comes out and starts 27, 28, it's a lot different than what we're looking at with Love in terms of a dynasty kind of outlet, if it took that long for him to kind of get on the field. The thing with Penix Jr. to me that I liked from kind of just, he has that effortless kind of arm strength, gets it out there quick. Perimeter deep is there. The thing that always is questioning me is, can he get over the middle? Can he make those throws over the middle? Can he kind of guide those guys? I think that's the one. And then like we put it, and we've talked about it. You've talked about it enough with him too. His lower body mechanics are pretty non-existent. Like, I
No.
really think he's going to have to fix that's going to take some time. Like, and I think that's one of the things the Falcons need to do is they're going to have to kind of reinvent his mechanics a little bit, especially your lower body. How are you going to kind of generate that torque without that upper body stuff? Because it's not going to work at the NFL level.
Well, especially when you talk about what this offense is gonna look like, and it's very like timing based. Depending on which variation of this offense they run, there is the offense where you're primarily in shotgun, but I don't think they're rolling that offense out there for Kirk Cousins. I think there's a very clear like you are going to take a 5-step drop here, and when you hit your back foot, you need to be getting the ball to here or here,
Yeah.
and that is just not something that Penix showed us at all. And so it's kind of like he might be a little more developmental in that sense because those timing things we saw it a little bit with Bryce Young last year too, where like footwork was a little lazy in college because he was able to do it that way. Then he gets to the NFL, it's a whole different ball game with the timing routes and the way the NFL offenses work. Penix is going to have that same kind of learning curve, I think.
That's my biggest red flag with Penix. That's my big thing. Like, hey, is he going to have that learning curve? He finds himself in a good system. I like his coaching staff now. I love his offensive coordinator. I like those things. But again, development. And then when you flip it over to Bo, what you're really getting is a guy that doesn't have a ton of competition behind him or ahead of him, however you want to look at it, with Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham kind of being there. When you think of him last year, I mean, from a production standpoint, dude balled out, had his career year, 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 4,500 yards. He looked really good for Oregon when you think of like what they put together there. And really, they lost to Michael Penix Jr. Like that's who Oregon lost to in terms of trying to get to the playoff. So when you saw that, he kind of reinvented himself in Dan Lanning's offense. And that's what you like to see from him. Now, the question remains with Bo, though. Like he's got, he's a much better athlete. So when you're thinking of both of these guys, Bo Nix has definitely always had that high level athlete. He can be a threat as a runner. Like he had 6 touchdowns last year, 14 the previous year. So he had 20 touchdowns the last 2 years in that system, which you've seen. Like we've talked about that from a fantasy standpoint. He can do that. Really good ball placement too. Like Bo really improved that. I wouldn't say that's how he was at the beginning of his Auburn tenure, but over time at Oregon, like you had that ball placement. Him and Troy Franklin created that kind of that connection there at Oregon. So you have that. He has elite tools. Bo Nix has always had elite tools. It's the other stuff. Like I think the anticipation problems. I think that, middle of the field as well for him. Didn't really get asked to do a ton of that either. Didn't have as good of a wide receiver room depth chart as like Washington did, but wasn't asked to do a ton of that either from that standpoint. And I do think that this offense is just, what do you believe in Sean Payton when you're thinking of like what he was able to put together? I know Sean Payton is arrogant enough to say Bo Nix is his QB1. He's going to ride him and he's going to do that. So from a 2024 standpoint, I think he gets out there pretty early. I think that he is going to get out there as early as he can. So if you're looking for a stopgap quarterback that you need like that guy, obviously Bo Nix is going to get that out there much earlier than Michael Penix Jr., barring an injury. Obviously, if Kirk Cousins goes down, yes. So I think that's where like many are kind of leaning Bo. If upside, hey, he's going to get on field, at least give me some kind of production there. But from a quarterback standpoint, does have some question marks. Is an older prospect as well, right? So played 5 years in college too. So this might be his ceiling. This is who he is. Bo Nix is who he is. What you saw at Oregon last year, and can he kind of develop that? And I think that's a huge question mark.
Yeah, and I think if I'm selling you on Bo Nix, I would say that who he was at Oregon is exactly who Sean Payton will want him to be, and that offense is going to be kind of tailored to Bo Nix's strengths and weaknesses. I do think down the stretch there was a lot of better film from Bo Nix. I think early on in the season it was like I'm going to throw a swing route to Bucky Irving and let Bucky Irving, and it was just consistently behind the sticks or behind the line of scrimmage. I think towards the end of the season, we saw some of those high level throws sprinkled in where it's like, oh, he layered it over the middle of the field. Why doesn't he do that all the time? And I do have some questions about if he's going to be able to do that at the NFL level. But when you talk about competition, I would comfortably say that Bo Nix is the best quarterback in this room. I think while Zach Wilson does have some potential, it's like I think Bo Nix is going to be the safest with the football, which is something that Sean Payton desires and wants. And I think he's going to just do what he is asked to do, whether that is, attempting to throw downfield or if it's, throwing screens to Samaje Perine or Jaleel McLaughlin over and over. Like, I think that is something that Sean Payton will like. So that gives Bo Nix the upper hand in that QB room.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no one in that room that I'm like, oh my gosh, they're gonna be ahead of Bo Nix. Like when you think of it from that perspective, and yeah, I do think that Peyton wants to set him up for success. So there is that going into it. Like, hey, this is kind of what my quarterback is. He really his job's kind of tied to this. He got rid of Russell Wilson. He picked Bo Nix, and whether you think that which is crazy to me. I know he picked Bo Nix there. We did not expect him to go there, but he did. And so now it's like, hey, they got to make this work there. So I guess the question comes down to, as we're kind of looking at this, like to me, this really comes down to, do you need production right away? Obviously, Bo Nix would be your pick if you're looking at that quarterback and you need to go. But all things withstanding, we're not going to say that. Obviously, that's like a cheap way to go out. Okay, Michael Penix Jr., you want to stash and all the value. But just based on their dynasty outlook, if we had to pick between these two guys, where if you had to take these guys, obviously somebody in the comments can be smart ass and just say, oh, you should take a running back, Trey Benson or whatever. We're not doing that. You got to pick these two. So where are you leaning with this argument?
It's Bo Nix for me, and it's Bo Nix for me because of value appreciation and depreciation, right? So Bo Nix getting on the field this year is, I know that there is insulated value with quarterbacks, and Jordan Love held a ton of value. I held Jordan Love through that time period. I stayed strong. I never got rid of him. I flipped him right before he started though, because I was like, you know what? I don't know if this kid's good. With Michael Penix, that's kind of what you're hoping for, is like that you can hold him for 2 years and then he gets on the field. I mean, really, it's sad to say, but you're hoping that Kirk Cousins doesn't work out and Penix can get on the field, but I just don't see that being the case. So to me, when you look at what Bo Nix can do, I'm not a huge Sean Payton believer, but I also think that Nix is one of those guys where I think even if Sean Payton is gone in a year or two, I think that Nix would stick, because I think he does have those intangibles, the traits to be a starting quarterback. I think Penix does too, and I think when all is said and done, after Penix plays, his 8 years, Penix might have better fantasy outlooks, but I'm personally not willing to wait 2 to 3 years for that to be the case. So I would take Bo Nix and maybe flip him for Penix plus later.
Yeah, no, I'm on Bo Nix side with that because of that. I will say with the most intriguing part of Michael Penix Jr. is the weapons around him if he gets out there. Bijan Robinson, Pitts, London, those guys inspire much more confidence than Cortland Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims. Like, yeah, obviously when you're thinking about those guys, you're not running to the table and smashing the draft button, but it's a problem is when he's out there. Bijan Robinson, these shelf lives of running backs, 2 or 3 years. Bijan Robinson, I mean, yeah, well, you hope he's there. But we've seen guys fall off very quicker than that. Kyle Pitts is still a mystery box, in my opinion. We think he's going to be good, but where does that come from? And again, they're good weapons. Maybe Kirk Cousins kind of unlocks them a little bit, but can Michael Penix Jr. do the same thing with these guys? It's a different quarterback. Will those weapons kind of elevate with him? Now, that insulated value, I don't know if that matters as much because he's going to have the value anyway. But I'm leaning Bo on this, and I cannot believe I'm saying that. Because I didn't like either one of these guys. I like Bo a little bit more, obviously coming into the year. To be honest, we were kind of on the Bo Oregon train 2 years ago. We got made fun of by some people out there, but I was like, hey, you know what? I kind of like what this is going. So I would lean there because I think that Peyton really wants this to work. Where the Falcons, it's just such a muddy area with Cousins and what they were trying to do there. Absolute worst landing spot for Michael Penix Jr. probably that he could have got. And so I'll lean Bo. Hey, that production's there. I do think there's a quarterback problem anyway in the NFL. I mean, look at some of the guys that were starting last year anyway. And Bo to me feels like just that, just that guy that's there. I mean, we comped him to Derek Carr, but just that guy that's kind of in the league that bounces around and maybe has a 10-year career where you can kind of plug him and go. And for a second-round quarterback in Superflex, that's not bad.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I've been in and out on both of these guys at different periods. I was in on Bo Nix, the Auburn versus Penn State game. I remember when he was still at Auburn. I was like, you know what? This kid has tools. I was in on Penix Jr. when he was at Indiana. So these kids have been on the radar. I feel like a lot of draft people who follow the draft are like, I can't believe these guys are being considered at all. They've been on the radar. They've had some really productive seasons too. I'm excited to see how this plays out for them. But to me, give me Nix. So I'll share some projections. I'm done with both of these teams. I have Michael Penix Jr. playing in one game and averaging 1.2 fantasy points per game in 2024. And I have Bo Nix averaging 16 fantasy points per game. So a solid QB2 in Superflex, where you're probably not having to draft him like that either. So to me, Nix is the pick.
Yeah, Nix is a pick. I like how we rounded that out there. So leave your comments below. What do you think? Where are you leaning at in your rookie drafts? Have you had to make this decision? Help us out. Go check out our Patreon. Make sure you jump in there. We got a lot of fun stuff going on in there. Discord, all of that stuff. Go to patreon.com to Devin Royale. Until next time, we appreciate you guys. We'll see you then.